Hi, video message for Ruth Louise. Going to persuade you to work away from your very lovely Ford 4000 and cultivator and move towards never leaving bare soil. This is alley cropping. It's a very small scale system, 12 metres between rows of trees, and then no dig, no walk, raised beds of vegetables between the trees. Keeping constant cover. There's some digging once every few years to put the potato seeds in and then to get them out again, and that's when I put the biochar in because the soil's being disturbed. This is biochar. It comes from, I mixed it with grass cuttings and all sorts of organic matter and comfrey, and it comes from my stove systems, and they're burning wood, some of which I'm growing in between the rows of crops, but I'm also letting tree surgeons drop wood chip off. I dry the wood chip in my wood chip drying shed, get all my hot water heat and cooking so I don't need to pay bills, and stabilises the carbon that the trees have drawn down. It makes it so it doesn't readily decompose in the soil. And I'll show you what happens to the soil, because the saving in work is in the weeding. So if you do see what should be a naughty weed otherwise, they're already loose. So yeah, these weeds, the whole roots just slide out so easily because the soil is so friable, so the biochar is inhibiting the decomposition of the other organic matter. I'm doing all I can to get as much stable forms of carbon and to stabilise the labile carbon in this soil. So even these tufts of grass just get the root out so easily. Left a bit. The plants are very healthy, so they photosynthesize. They put at a much faster rate than unhealthy plants, and not chloritic. So that means they're giving more carbon up as root exudates through their roots. And the root exudates bring in good soil biology in terms of locking carbon in the soil, so that carbon is relatively stable. The biochar will be there for a couple of thousand years at least. Otherwise, if it's just wood or wood chip or grass cuttings, it decomposes, it's labile. So it's as many stable forms. Then you have the root exudates from the tree roots and the perennials that are going under the crops. These three beds is a rotation: sweet corn or grains, then potatoes, then beet. In this case beetroot, fodder beet further down. Then we have and again I have stepping stones, so I don't need to walk on the beds. These are 5 beds of vegetables, different rotation. Potatoes, but these are nearly all out, these were the earlies. Brassica, these are the purple sprouting broccoli for next spring. Those are the garlic, which are ready to come out now. And again, they're much easier to harvest because of the soil. You can see they're all good crops. And these alliums got onions down there. Potatoes, brassicas, alliums, again I'm using stepping stones. I'm not even walking on this. I mean, there's a badger been coming in at night. They do nick crops, they do dig holes. They're after, because there's a much higher level of earthworms and it's so easy to dig, so it brings badgers in. So this is brassicas, alliums, roots. Those are the parsnips. That bed's gone a little bit weedy, but it's not a problem. Under the fleece of the carrots. Then we've got the 3 sisters, in this case squash, and we're mid-July. The squash are looking good. These ones, I've got to do a few different varieties. I keep the varieties separate, and I just throw, when one starts to cross a path, just tuck it back in. Then there's another row of trees. Find a stepping stone. With a lot of comfrey in the middle. Willow for basket making, for biochar. Oh, I'll count the parsley as a root because it's the same, it's the umbellifera family. This will get bigger, obviously it's a fairly young crop. Lots of comfrey between the trees, helps with weed suppression. There's also fruit trees in there, fairly young. Pear tree without any pears. The carbon being drawn down by the willow trees as wood, gets burnt in the biochar stoves, and then the biochar gets returned to the beds. So that's full cycle biochar, heat capture, and trying to grow the coppice wood for the stoves on in rows between the crops, with root exudates all surrounding the crops. Tons of bumblebees buzzing around, letting the comfrey go to flower a bit. Another row of trees. So then exactly the same again, 5 beds of vegetables. Same rotation, potatoes, brassica. This patch is going to be spring cabbages, there's Swedes further down. Alliums, those are leeks. There's a patch that's going to be planted. Then we've got onions, then roots under the fleece, main crop carrots and 3 sisters. These are oca, I treat them as potatoes. So easy to plant and harvest the potatoes without a tractor when your soil is this loose, this friable. So much easier to pull weeds out, and it reverses climate change. Another row, you can see all the perennials, chestnut trees, phormium for basket making, a lot of comfrey, that's the main source of fertility. Older trees make good biochar, willow biochar and biofuel, and the same again, slightly newer beds. Potatoes, these are pink fir apple, brassica, alliums, roots, those are autumn king carrots under the fleece, 3 sisters, in this case squash. Then there's a newer row of perennials. It's giant miscanthus, but it's still very small down there. Biofuel again for the biochar stoves. The big advantage is in the weeding. It's going to lose money anyway, because spoilt consumers don't know the extent to which their climate changing food is subsidised. They're in for a big wake up call very soon, when the petrodollar does collapse. It's not worth doing. It's not worth growing vegetables locally, especially if you don't really have, if you're in an area where there isn't really customer loyalty, which where people are more loyal to Tesco's, or where you're competing against subsidised. I don't actually like CSAs because they get so subsidised. It's unfair on the unsubsidised growers. So if you have carbon rich soil, you should thrive. If you knacker your soil, you should go bust. The subsidies stop that natural system from happening. By knackering soil, you cause climate change. Your soil look good, but it should always be covered. It really should. Protected from rain, protected from UV from the sun, and there we have it. Oh, there's a wood chip drying shed behind there, and one day I'll do a little video and show you how the stove systems work. Okay, so put your beautiful tractor in its shed, start planting rows of trees, ideally long contours, this field's level. Get alley cropping in place. These are 12 metres here between centres and 14 metres between centres of the trees on those beds. 2 metre for a bed and path, so the bed's about 1.5 metres, so you can reach to weed from either side of the bed without stepping on the beds. So no walk, no, minimum dig, raised beds, full cycle biochar, alley cropping all combined. Makes life much easier, reduces the workload, makes it more of a pleasure, because although it's not going to pay anyway, so you may as well just turn your soil into a massive carbon sink. And yep, weeding, if you do see a perennial weed, they just slide out so easily. That's where the real ease of work comes in. It's harder to prepare the ground, you've got to stay on top of the weeds. It's much easier to stay on top of them. Okay, put the tractor away and work towards this. I know it's a struggle whatever you do. And the tractors, what you're actually doing very often is you're making conditions right for the weeds, not the crops. Whereas what I'm trying to do is make conditions where the crops, which aren't as hardy, can outcompete the weeds much more easily.